Trevor, you just heard me. He has arrived. Let's listen in.
But thank you so much for being here with us today to discuss your freshly launched ESG reporting platform, DiginexESG. Before we jump in, could you give us an overview of your career up to now?
Well, thanks, Andal. It's a pleasure to be here and talk about the platform that we have and the product which we've just launched. I've spent the last 20 years in Asia launching and or building and launching products and platforms. So I've typically worked on high-scale platforms that have been looking to reach lots of different markets quickly, and that's what attracted me to what we're doing at the moment.
Okay, great. And then Diginex Solutions, your company is an impact technology company. What does that entail, and how does this foundation, how did it lead to developing Diginex ESG?
Okay, well, I can take a little bit of a meander and give you the background of how we got here. So I think it's really important in our journey and how we landed upon this as a critical product. If I go back 3 years ago to 2018 when I joined the company, back then, and blockchain now is still new, but back then it was even newer. And I would walk into meetings with government officials or regulators or senior executives at companies and mention the word blockchain. And they would tend to think it was the best thing in the world or the worst thing in the world. So either it removed plastic from the world's oceans, or it had the same carbon as Denmark. One of those two extremes, and everything in between. And so when I joined the company back then, a young blockchain company, we really wanted to have a better hold on the narrative so that when we were given these misconceptions, we could say, well, that's interesting, but let's walk you through some of the work that we were doing. So I came in for the first, I'd say 3 or so months of my time at the company, was really an in-house market consultancy project. I looked at 101 different possible applications of blockchain, from the typical ones around treasury management, loyalty, product provenance, all these different ideas. And what we settled upon, partly by chance because of the people that we met, but what we settled upon was leveraging blockchain technology to enhance transparency in global supply chains. But whilst everybody had gone and looked at the product, we looked at people. And we looked at how can we help drive transparency around the flows of workers traveling from one country to another country in search of work in the supply chain of some of the world's largest companies. And we still do that, and we partner with folks like the US State Department, US Department of Labor, Coca-Cola, the United Nations, to help with this work. And in the course of that, we built this complex data management platform that really does 3 principal things. It helps collect and surface data. It then moves that data into an environment where it can be audited and investigated, and then ultimately allows you to publish and report that data. And so our supply chain work continues, and we're very proud of it. And we have a large product release coming up in about 2 months called DiginexLUMEN, which is similar to DiginexESG. It is really meant to be accessible and affordable to all companies, no matter the size. Around 20 months ago, a colleague of mine, Jessica, our Chief Corporate Affairs Officer, who had spent a long time in ESG, first at the World Economic Forum and then at her own impact consultancy, pitched us on this idea of this tech stack that we had built that allowed us to do all sorts of complex things with data and make complex things simple for users and for companies. That could be repurposed for ESG reporting. And her pitch to us, which really became our mission, was that if you go back 10, 15 years ago, you have BlackRock and Fidelity putting pressure on General Motors and Philip Morris to improve their sustainability reporting. And to a large extent, these mega large caps have achieved that. And they've done that because they've got the budget to go out there and hire lots of people and bring them in-house and get billboards at airports with watering cans and green shoots and blue skies and so on. But if you then the industry that sprung up to support that tended to be sustainability consultants selling expensive sustainability consultancy services to in-house sustainability consultants. So a very circular conversation. But if you fast forward to the last couple of years, that pressure around disclosure and and reporting, either mandatory. So for example, I'm here in Hong Kong Stock Exchange has mandatory ESG reporting for all companies listed on the exchange, or it's voluntary, but it's increasingly becoming peer class pressure to start your journey somewhere. So if you are a small mid-cap enterprise and you think, okay, perhaps 5 years ago, I thought ESG was something that sat in marketing, but now I realize this is something I have to do. And I go in the market, but what I find is it's expensive and it's going to take me a lot of time, and it's going to be quite disruptive to my flows. And I don't have an in-house team to help deal with this for me. It's probably the CFO who is taking it on, or maybe the company secretary, or maybe the investor relations person. But they're taking it on top of their already busy day job. And they're approaching it from the position of a newbie. They don't have 20 years of experience in environmental science or sustainability. So the barrier to entry was really, really high. And we've always believed, and we've seen this through our supply chain work, in order to have real impact and to be truly meaningful, it needs to be impact at scale. So it needs to be a product which is used by everybody, not just the mega large caps at the top of the market who can afford it. Okay. So we spent a long time then doing benchmarking, going out there, understanding what was in the market, looking at other industries. We pulled in a lot of learning from other industries. In the US, I'm sure you've seen on movies and TV shows how difficult US individual tax reporting is. And it's difficult and it's inefficient and it's painful and no one likes doing it. And there always seems to be a rush at the end of the year to get it done and send it in. And then this company came along called TurboTax, and they made it intuitive and easy and simple to complete and affordable and tax reporting for everybody, without the need to go to a tax consultant, without the need to spend 4 months working it out. And so we took examples like this from other industries that are taking complex tasks and made them accessible to everybody, and applied that same belief and those same learnings towards ESG reporting and sustainability reporting, and our belief that to be truly impactful, this has to be available to everybody.
Okay, great. So for those who don't really know anything about this new digital solution, could you just give a high-level overview of what it can do for their company and the ESG reporting?
So really, it's going to move you through a series of different steps. At the first step, it's helping by using machine learning and data analytics. It's helping inform you about what you as a company, the topics that you should be concerned about or you should think about. So the topics of an oil and gas company, let's say 5,000 people publicly held, would care about are going to be different to a financial services company based in Toronto with 30 people that are private. Within the broad scheme of sustainability, yes, there are topics which everybody should care about, but there are definitely going to be some more relevant to some industries than others. And so at the first step, we're going to help companies understand that. And if you were to go externally to consultants, often that's something that costs you $20,000 and takes 2 months. And we're saying we can get you 80% of the way there in 5 minutes. And then it's going to help you take those topics and curate them a little bit, or just follow the recommendations of the platform, and then start building a report which you align to one of the major global frameworks. So within sustainability reporting, you have, it's commonly known as the alphabet soup of frameworks. Now there's some consolidation going on there right now, but you have things like GRI and SASB and TCFD, all with their own slightly different flavors. And then you have the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, the stock exchange reporting requirements as well. So it allows you to start choosing what is the framework that's going to be most relevant to you. And then a lot of it becomes a work management tool. We did a survey of listed companies in the UK last summer. And one of the loudest pieces of feedback that we heard was that the person writing the sustainability report in the company was often the most unpopular person in the company, because he or she was always chasing other people saying, can you send me this file? Why haven't you responded? And so on and so forth. And then similarly, that person was also the most frustrated person in the company, because he or she was always having to chase other people. And one of our early clients we were working with in the listed company that was using an Excel spreadsheet with 20 different tabs that they sent around 40 different people over a 6-month period. So it's very difficult to get accountability and auditability of the data, and it's a very unwieldy process. So we wanted to really improve that and give the author of the report a single place where they could manage Information gathering, and they could set alerts and reminders and things like standard deviation alarms if data changes much year on year, and set targets and so on and so forth. So to have that all in one place. So that's where we, again, looking for analogies. If you're familiar with the communications channel Slack, having something like Slack and hard coding that for ESG reporting, just to make that process infinitely easier, and taking something that would have taken 6 months to complete, bringing it down to under a month. And then the last 2 steps is first of all going out for approval, because you've written your report. You probably need to go to your board or to your investors or externally to get sign off, and then ultimately publishing it. And when we first developed this platform, we soft launched in November. And one of the early pieces of feedback we heard loud and clear was that the report didn't look good enough. It didn't look professional enough. People wanted a report that they would feel proud to put on their website. So we worked really hard over Christmas holidays, and we had a sprint. That's a specific amount of time that a development team will work on building specific features and functions. And we build what we think is a pretty great report generator, that all of that information that you collect through your collaborations and through that Slack type channel is pulled into a report. And I think it's 5 or 6 clicks and you're done. And you have a report that looks professional, that you can put on your website. Alternatively, if you have your own marketing team, you can download it and have them work on it and put on your own logos and branding. But you have the optionality there. So we really wanted to make all of that available for $99 per month. And that was really important for us.
Now that's incredible. I mean, that's the thing, you might have all the information, but then to finally put it in a product that you can present, that also then still take, quite a long time. So you just made it very accessible. Yeah. Still, many companies might be a bit wary still to use, new software. So what do they need before they can actually implement DiginexESG?
Very little. You onboard yourselves. And you need to have started thinking about what's important for you. We hear a lot of companies who are just starting. So the audience that we really go after are those people who have just started reporting or are just about to start. It's that company that 5 years ago thought ESG was a new joiner in marketing, and are now have been sitting on the fence and are looking for a reason to start. Yeah. And a lot of our clients say to us, look, we want to get started, but we're not ready to report on 100 different topics. We're just not there yet. I want to be there in 3 or 4 years' time. Yeah. But where we are now is we want to start with 5 topics or 10 topics. So I think having an idea of what's important to you is important. Now, our platform will do a lot of that recommendation for you. And you can follow the recommendations of the platform and just follow that process. Is also important. But I think having an idea of, okay, where is it that A, we want to start reporting, and B, where can we start reporting? I think that's important. But really the platform itself, you just need access to a browser in the internet and you're up and running. It's very, very simple. So if you've used any CRM system like Salesforce, it's exactly the same.
Okay, great. I mean, most people have used, software like that, so it should be quite easy to adapt. And if a company is just starting out, like you said, with ESG reporting, is it possible to tackle the entire process by themselves, or do they need a special task force inside the company that's dedicated to the entire process, or even an ESG consultant?
It is absolutely designed so you can complete it by yourself. When you arrive on the landing page, you're given a choice. You're a newbie or you're experienced. And depending on the path that you take, the journey will be slightly different. Experience assumes you understand what sustainability is or ESG means. We still get questions around what does ESG stand for? So the newbie path has all these pop-ups and prompts and explainers and libraries of information that if you were experienced at this, you wouldn't need. And the experienced version is a much smoother version of that. Now, all the way through the platform, you have the ability to choose. Either you can follow the recommendations of the platform, or if you do want to go out for help, because some people do, and there are some questions in there which are complex. So, for example, calculating your carbon emissions of all the vehicles in your operations, it can be complex. So this is something which, if you're confident and you have that information, by all means, you can follow the platform and follow the instructions that we give. Or if you need to go out for validation or assurance on the data, or just sign off on the data, that's there too. So it's really up to the company to decide how much help they need.
Okay, great. In our research, I've seen, and we've touched on this briefly on price, ESG reporting platforms can be quite costly, and they also require a large team to continually manage the process, which we've also touched on. But yeah, Diginex ESG addresses both these roadblocks.
Absolutely, and it goes back to the company that's sitting on the fence thinking, shall I do it this year, or maybe I can just wait a year? And we think that's a huge amount of companies. Our experience has been the typical small company, maybe it's 3 to 5 people probably interact on the report, because not everybody knows everything about everything. So you might want to invite your head of HR or your CFO or your CEO, but it's a small group of people, and you would assign different people different tasks to do. So the head of HR would work on the employment related information, maybe the CFO signs off on the more financial audit type of questions, and so on and so forth. And on the cost side, I mean, we've looked at this market in depth, and I can quite honestly say I don't think we've seen anything like this on the market at this price point.
I'm like, just under $100, that's really definitely affordable for most companies. But if they're already using another ESG reporting platform, how easy is it to switch to your software without losing any progress or data?
Yep, it's very easy. We have historical data upload capabilities. So I would say that the first year is going to be the heavier lift. But you would upload any historical data that you have, and then moving forward, that becomes your data repository. So another piece of feedback that we heard was, it's not just about your annual report. All the way through the year, you have requests for sustainability information. It might be from an investor or a regulator. You might be looking at a consumer group or the public sector who are coming to you for specific bits of information, and having that in one place. And then similarly, some information throughout the year won't change. Maybe your company name, hopefully you don't need to update that on a quarterly basis. But things like your electricity consumption, yeah, you probably do. So it's something that you'll go back to through the year. And that's where the collaborative team functionality will help, that you can set alerts and reminders to specific people to be able to do things on specific days throughout the year. So it's not just somebody sitting at the top getting frustrated because they're reminding everybody else to do stuff. And then to have a dashboard to see what's completed and what isn't, and have alerts to say, okay, this needs to be done, it's out of date, and so on and so forth. So we are looking to make it as efficient as possible.
Okay, great. Adopting new software can sometimes be quite disruptive to the business's daily operations. How long does it usually take for a company to integrate Diginex ESG into their own systems?
There's no integration. It's a web-based platform. They're much like Salesforce or Monday.com or ClickUp.com, these types of platforms. There's no integration needed. We do have requests from companies that want to build APIs to take the information out and put it into their systems, but that's on a case-by-case basis, and it tends to be the larger companies. But as an individual company coming along, all they would need is their name, address, and a credit card, and they get going. No integration needed.
Okay, well, that sounds.
So if you've used Dropbox, same type of approach.
Great. At the start, there must be quite a bit of customization needed to suit, the specific industry and as well as the region that they're operating in. How involved are you in that process?
Yeah, it varies. So the platform as it stands covers 77 different industries. So we think this covers a lot of them. I wouldn't say it's 100% of the industries, but I'd say it's in the high 90s of the 90% of the industries that we cover. And we worked a lot with the global frameworks and trying to understand what are the topics that are relevant to the mining industry, or the oil and gas industry, or the consumer industry, or the transportation industry, and then being able to segment those on various different levels. So on a country level, on ownership level, on a size level. So the platform already provides that guidance right from the beginning on these are the types of topics which are relevant for a specific industry. On top of that, let's say within oil and gas, as more and more oil and gas companies onboard onto the platform, we'll learn a lot more about what a typical oil and gas company feels is important to them. So our platform will, on our original set of data analytics, based on the work with the global sustainability frameworks, make some recommendations, a lot of recommendations, as to what's important to specific companies and specific sectors. But as we build up more and more knowledge of what specific companies and specific sectors, then pick and choose, because you have the ability to curate those topics. we will give recommendations. So companies of your size in this industry typically report on these topics, and it's entirely up to the company on a case-by-case basis to choose whether to add those or not. But we will give those prompts and guidances all the way through. And then the second part is there are some cases where we are partnering with companies in specific sectors to build frameworks specific for that industry. So if we look at a partnership with Hafnia, that's it's a tanker company, and we're working with them to build a framework which is specific for the maritime industry. What we see a lot of is people, so you have GRI, you have SASB, you have TCFD, you have the World Economic Forum, stakeholder capitalism metrics, and within industries you have individual ones, is people increasingly wanting to pick and choose and say, well, I'll have a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and then to put in a custom disclosure, which is particularly relevant to them. And that's a feature which we're going to have coming pretty soon, which will allow companies to curate their own sets of frameworks which they want to use, which will cross-reference all of the different voluntary frameworks.
Okay. I've been watching the news lately and I've seen quite a few ESG reporting solutions pop up. What sets your Diginex ESG apart from all the rest?
Okay, so I would say three things. First of all, product. We are very proudly a technology company. We have, let's say 80% product and tech, and then the rest is either management and operations or it's sustainability specialists. But we lead first and foremost as we're a product and technology company, which allows us to build product and technology and take it to market at this price point. And the second point is the pricing, being able to make it affordable to everybody. There are competitors out there that I've seen that says affordable pricing starting at peace of mind pricing starting at $20,000 to $60,000. I know for many companies, $20,000 to $60,000 doesn't give them peace of mind at all. And we have approaches. Thirdly, if you look at the best in class of SaaS models of being able to onboard yourself, having online 24 service, having chat box embedded in the platform that does give that self-service capability. That's something that we've looked at very, very carefully. So I think that the product pricing and the service model, from what I can see in the market, and we did a lot of analysis in the first 9 months of last year, in 2020. No one is approaching it from this angle. I think a lot of folks out there are positioning themselves as tech-enabled platforms. But when you look at it, it tends to be a web portal that directs you to a consultancy service. And if you look at the people that generally these companies have, again, they're well suited to large caps that want to do a 6-month study that costs $100,000 and takes a lot of time. So I think it's important to look at the composition of the companies in this space to see, well, do they have a tech and product team, and how deep is that team, and so on and so forth. I think that's our unique selling point in this market.
Okay, great. I also read in your one launch article, you mentioned it's the first blockchain-enabled product that's certified by the Global Reporting Initiative. What is the significance of that and the relevance of the certification?
Well, the Global Reporting Initiative for us have been a great partner. Obviously, they're the most comprehensive sustainability framework so far. They were very helpful and very, very thorough in making sure that we passed the certification process. We have multiple rounds of feedback to make sure that we got everything right. So a lot of the things that our platform does is the heavy lifting so that the client doesn't have to.
Okay.
So once we understand a company, and we do that through an automated onboarding process, we'll then do a lot of the heavy lifting. But in order to make sure that the results and the recommendations are correct, we had to go through multiple rounds of feedback to get the certification. Of course, we wouldn't want to onboard a company and then give wrong recommendations. And they were very instructive through that process. It was also important for us, I mean, as our roots as a blockchain company, that we think it's important. We think it's important for accountability. We think it's important for auditability. We think it's important for companies to own the information that they have. And then in future years, once they've built that library of sustainability information that has a high degree of accountability and auditability to it, it increases the value of that sustainability information to the company itself. As we know, at the moment, you have a couple of large players in the ESG industry, which are just scraping the internet for bits of sustainability information about companies and then rolling that up into an annualized score, which seems to me to be relatively inaccurate, which companies don't really benefit from, at least not directly. But if they are able to start developing and owning data themselves, which they can start giving permission to other folks to access, that gives them much more control over the repository of information they're gathering.
Okay, definitely. But although sustainability reporting has been around for quite some time, it still seems quite complex, especially for the oil and gas companies. We've spoken about it a little bit, but how will DiginexESG help them address that specifically?
I think oil and gas companies, similar to other sectors, is how do we make this as affordable and accessible and easy to companies in the oil and gas sector who are just thinking about starting, or maybe within the first couple of years of their sustainability reports. So maybe they're struggling on Excel and it takes 6 months and they don't have the budget. And they've got a platform which, as I mentioned before, we've already customized this to 77 different industries, and of course oil and gas being one of them, is they can use this to really jumpstart their sustainability reporting and get them to a place that previously I think was only accessible to companies with massive budgets. So within, let's say, within the oil and gas context, to the BPs and Shells of this world. And we think that's great. Of course, BP and Shell should have detailed reports, and they're huge companies with massive operations. But how about companies which are smaller or not quite as distributed as those companies, and wanting to get started, but wanting to have a report that looks as good as the ones that BP and Shell have? And that's where we want to get people to.
Okay, and how does it help a company to get into conversations with the investors and the government and their customers as well?
I think increasingly it's about stickiness and transparency. The more that you're able to demonstrate to investors, regulators, and consumers about your company, and then as external stakeholders being able to trust the information that they're seeing, the better it is for your ability to raise money, to attract consumers, and to get government permissions and licenses for the things that you want to do. And I think by using so a while ago you had the standardization of financial indicators, and that was really important. So how everybody reports their EBITDA, or how the accounting standards that companies use. But historically, up until now, there hasn't really been standardization around sustainability reporting. So to enable companies to start to present this in a standardized way that's easily available, accessible, and affordable, which will make them more appealing to consumers, more appealing to investors, and also regulators, who I think also, you look at the different pressures in this industry of where is the pressure for increased disclosure around sustainability coming from? Well, a lot of it is coming from regulators. They're absolutely aware that this is something that's important. A lot of it's coming from investors, and them realizing that a well-run company, not just on financial indicators, but also on sustainability indicators, is one of the strongest indicators for a well-run company. So the more information a company can give about how it operates, and more investors also have specific topics which are really, really relevant to them. So whether it's water or diversity or carbon emission, they're able to get more exposure and transparency into the companies they might want to allocate capital to. And that's critical to them in the capital allocation process. And of course, consumers are more and more vociferously asking for information about the companies that operate in the countries that they're in.
Okay. And another integral part of ESG reporting is the auditability, accountability, and transparency of all the information, the data that you are disclosing. So how does DiginexESG assist a company to adhere to all these elements?
So this goes back to, we think that, so we, in our supply chain business, so that's the work that we did for 3 years before we started launching this. What we learned was, you often get this question, like, blockchain is great, but how do you control for rubbish in, rubbish out? That's a very common question that comes up within the context of blockchain, and it's a really great question, which is, yes, you've got great data, but how do I know where this data came from? And what we learned very early on is, if somebody knows that they're going to be held accountable to the data that they've entered through an audit trail, they are much more likely to think more carefully and thoroughly about the information that they enter. And information is entered erroneously for two reasons. One, somebody presses 6 instead of 3. Or two, somebody is deliberately entering in inaccurate information. And if you entered in 6 instead of 3, that's totally fine. You realize you made a mistake, you go back and say, I'm sorry, it's 3, it's not 6, but there's a record of that, and that's fine. You can explain that that was just a data entry error. But if somebody is willfully entering in information that they know not to be true, to go back to that other example of a company we're working with, of the 20 different tabs on Excel spreadsheet sent around 40 different people, there's no accountability there. I can enter in 350 or 650, and no one's going to hold me accountable to that. But within our platform, one of the safety checks that we have is every time someone takes action, that action is event logged. So it's really important that it's not the data itself that we're storing on a blockchain. It's the action associated with that data entry. So who entered in that data, who changed that data, who went out to an external party looking for validation on that data, who uploaded a document, and so, who approved it, and so on and so forth. And so when, at the end of the process, somebody, let's say an investor or a government regulator, gets a report and it says carbon emission 342. And they'll say, well, how do I know it's 342? You're able to say, well, first of all, I've attached evidentiary documentation as a hyperlink to the individual data field. That's another feature that we have. So that makes it much simpler because you're not searching around for the supporting document. It's right there. Every data field, you have the potential to attach evidentiary documentation. And second of all, there's an event log of everybody who interacted with that data field. So you can see the data provenance exercise that went in, or data provenance process that went into collecting that information. And if it was one person entering in lots of information 6 hours before the report was entered, well, that's probably a flag. Or if it's information going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Again, that gives you a reason to say, well, this is peculiar. Why has this happened? And so that A gives you recourse and some history into the data collection. And then B, again, it makes people think twice, and we think that's important. My colleagues know very well that I like to give analogies. And so the analogy I like to give in this case is, if you're in a car and you're driving and you get into a crash, well, there are chances that you might get hurt. But if you combine the seatbelt, the brakes, and the airbag all together, well, that gives you a pretty good chance of walking away unharmed. We view data entry the same. If you just put in data entry and don't put in any checks and balances, then that's problematic. That's no better than the Excel spreadsheet going around to 40 different people. But if you put in checks and balances like evidentiary documentation, like standard deviation alerts, so if there are sudden jumps in ranges, that's an issue. Well, it's potentially an issue. Or you have the provenance on the data fields, so people can understand the history of that data entry. You put all those things together and you start creating much more robustness around the information. And this goes back to my earlier point. Once you've gone through this process and you have a set of data around your company and its sustainability and its ESG indicators that has a high degree of, external people will have a high degree of confidence in, then you can do so much more with that information because people will trust it.
You just mentioned about, investors maybe coming back and saying, how do I know that this information is correct? So I'm assuming that happens a lot because you've already got the feature in there. So do a lot of investors come back and say, well, prove this?
But this is a feature that we took over almost from the get-go from our other products because we knew it was an important thing. And in our mind, and we'd always address that question of rubbish in, rubbish out. And I think we'd already, what's the word for it? We'd anticipated that this question would come.
Yeah.
So this is right from early days, we knew was important because we sat and asked, if I'm a regulator and I get this information, how do I trust it? And that was the same in our supply chain business. If I'm surfacing up indicators around workers and supply chains and sending it to the local Ministry of Labor, and they look at it and they think, well, how do I know this is true? So it's the same type of methodology. And we think it's only reasonable if you're being presented with something. If it's a trusted partner that you have a long relationship with, then absolutely, you have one level of audit. If it's someone that's new and it's the first time or have a history of incomplete data or some questions around data, then you have the ability to dig in. And importantly, later on, or very shortly, we have an asset manager module, which will allow the investor to dig in and engage on individual indicator levels. So there may be something which is a flag to them, which they then want to reach into the company, into the supply chain, and start digging into individual points. And we can come, I think, in a little bit, you ask about DiginexLUMEN, and that's part of that idea.
Okay, well, actually, that is my next question.
Okay, I see. Yeah.
And also, I saw launching soon is DiginexCLIMATE. So how do all these all work together? If you could just give us a little bit more information.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, they're all built on the same tech stack. So that tech stack, I mentioned earlier that there's three different things around data aggregation and collection, servicing, auditing and investigation, and then reporting and sharing. And they're all built on that engine. That's really important for us. And then to begin with, we built DiginexESG, which is a layer on top of that tech stack, which looks at ESG reporting at a sort of relatively broad high level. DiginexLUMEN then allows you to go very deep on an individual topic around supply chain transparency, particularly around employers and workers. And that's our roots and where we came from. So we know that topic really well. And we have a couple of excellent specialists on our team who are able to help us and guide us on the content. And climate is the same. It allows you to do the high level look and then go deep on that topic if you want to look at helping companies with their carbon calculations, with their offsetting. And for all of the products that we have the same theme, which is how do I make this accessible and affordable to everybody? So you're going to see very similar pricing across all of these three products. Because our belief is, again, to be truly impactful, it has to be done at scale. It can't be the top 10% of companies. It needs to be a high proportion of companies that are doing this regularly, and you're only going to get those types of numbers if you reduce the barriers to entry as low as possible. And by barriers to entry, not just the price, but also the ease of use. Something that we found, this goes back to the question you asked me about what differentiates ourselves with other ESG platforms. What we found, and I think this applies to DiginexLUMEN and DiginexCLIMATE too, is when we onboard ourselves to these platforms, they all assume we know what we're talking about. So when you onboard yourself to many of the ESG reporting platforms at the moment, because many of these platforms are used to dealing with in-house sustainability consultants, they're going to be throwing complex language at you. And we've gone through this ourselves. And they'll be saying, oh, walk me through your TCFD carbon 1 emissions. You think, I have no idea. So and this makes people feel intimidated, and it makes people feel nervous, and it makes people not want to engage. And we really wanted to make this accessible to someone who doesn't understand the content, and accessible to someone who just wants to get started. And that was really important for us. And that's the same for Lumen and for DiginexCLIMATE too.
Is ESG reporting mostly aimed at listed companies to appeal to the investors, and is that the reason why the smaller companies didn't really, look into it or adopt as easily or as quick to catch on?
I think ESG reporting historically has been mainly focused on public companies. And again, if we go back to BlackRock and Fidelity putting pressure on generally publicly listed companies to improve their sustainability reporting, but that pressure for increased transparency and disclosure has rolled downhill to both public and private small, mid-sized enterprises over the last 3 to 4 years. The split for our clients is around 50-50. Okay. So we have some publicly listed companies, they tend to be more mid-caps, but we have a number of private ones too. So I see the drivers often being investors. That could be a public and market investor or a private investor. It can be a private equity company saying, if this is important to us. So we work with an asset manager in the US, for example, that really care about social public housing. And so for them, that's really, really important. So when they look at companies, either public or private, it's important that they're able to collect information on the indicators related to this specific topic. So either you have investor pressure, either from the public markets or the private markets. And on that point, in the public markets, because there is already some degree of transparency. Actually, there's some information flow already there. If you're let's say you're a private company looking to raise money in credit or debt, in private credit or debt markets, it's really difficult because there's very little information out there. So you're going into the market, approaching folks that may have capital to allocate, but there's no information on you as a company. So I think it addresses both public and private markets equally importantly. You have pressure from regulators, and again, that can be addressed towards public or private companies. I think the legacy driver is an important one too, which is equally important for public or private companies. Sometimes more so for private, that you have founders or CEOs that are understanding that sustainability is an important thing and will be for the next generation and the generation thereafter. They're beginning to, or have for a while, begun to think around, how do I leave my company in a state where it's ready to operate in that kind of world? And so I think that legacy, or even that the second generation owner impact is really important too, where they're beginning to understand that it can't, I mean, of course, for any company, being profitable is important and being able to operate is important. But now I think more and more companies are beginning to realize that the holistic picture of its impact to the world and its impact to environment is also important too.
Okay, and the different regulatory bodies, like SASB, for instance, they all have their, their own criteria. Your software, I see, is specifically aligned to SASB standards. Did you concentrate on satisfying that specifically?
So we try to get the major frameworks. So we started with GRI, SASB, then TCFD. We also have the exchange frameworks like Hong Kong Exchange, but working with the London Stock Exchange also. And a lot of it is, and for the voluntary ones, it's company preference. Obviously, GRI tends to be the more popular one, but SASB is growing quickly. What we've tended to find is, and you probably know this as well, that GRI tends to be about the companies telling the world about themselves, whereas SASB tends to be about investors asking companies to tell them about them. So there are slightly different flavors and feels to this. And obviously TCFD is more focused on climate. GRI tends to be more European, and SASB tends to be more US, and this may just be simply because GRI was founded in Europe and SASB was founded in the US. Interesting fact which I came across the other day, you look at something like GRI, and this is in 2019, so maybe a little bit out of date now. You have more companies that adhere to the GRI standards in Peru than you do in the US.
Wow.
So you have these, you have these pockets where sustainability on SASB or GRI or TCFD just sprung up because that's where they happen to catch hold. So I think to take a truly global approach, you need to have all the major frameworks. But what I also believe is something I mentioned earlier, which is I think increasingly people will want to pick and choose, and I want the flexibility to have a bit of one, a bit of the other. Right now, if companies want to do multiple reporting, to the extent that definitions are aligned, they've got to enter in the same information multiple times over, which is incredibly frustrating to companies. What our platform will allow you to do, enter in it once, and it will also enter across all the frameworks to the extent that the definitions are aligned. So that again is the huge operational uplift.
Definitely. If we look at the different industries, some have been slower to adapt to ESG reporting. In your years of experience, what's been the biggest roadblocks and hindrances that prevent the oil and gas companies from embracing ESG reporting?
I think it goes back to what we've had fairly consistently today is around accessibility and affordability. And that there's one of the type of person I speak to probably most of all is a CFO or a COO or a company secretary that's they've been at their company for 20 or 30 years, and they've just begun to realize that this is something which is not going away. And I think maybe 5 years ago, they might have hoped that it did, but now they realize that it's not going to. And that the amount of capital flowing around sustainability and ESG is incredible and will almost certainly only increase over time. And there is a very strong correlation between those companies that are transparent around their sustainability and who also perform well. So again, I think the biggest roadblock has been It's been difficult to understand. It's been really expensive. It's being highly disruptive. The materiality assessment, which I mentioned earlier that we do, that gets you 80% of the way there in 5 minutes. Often for companies, if they go in the market, what they're being told is, this is going to take you 2 months. It's going to be 20 different interviews across 10 different stakeholders. We're going to have the book time, and it's highly disruptive. So you can see why people walk away from this and just put it off for another year. And accessibility and affordability and ease of use, just, I think it's really, really important. And again, this is where we can take lessons from other industries. Like I built a website recently. I'm not a website designer. I am very, very far away from being a creative website designer. But you have a company like Wix came along. I don't know whether you've ever used them.
Yes.
That enables someone like me that doesn't really understand website creation to go online. I have to think about it, obviously, and spend some time, but I can come out of that process with a website and being able to take those learnings on the sort of democratization of tools and making those available to everybody that you see in other industries and make it relevant for sustainability.
So currently you've mentioned the ESG landscape is definitely evolving rapidly. How do you see it evolving in the next couple of years?
I think that all those folks that are sitting on the fence will have to get off the fence in the next couple of years. And I think that's increasingly obvious in terms of how many things which were voluntary will become mandatory, either explicitly or de facto. If you want to raise money in capital markets, if you don't have a sustainability report, it's probably going to be very difficult, especially if you're in industries which are considered to be potentially impactful on the environment. So I think that's one thing. But I think the standardization and again, the putting the value on your sustainability information, I think that's really important. Rather than just having it scraped from the internet, allowing companies to take ownership of that data, decide who have access to it, be able to learn from peer class comparisons, and be able to monetize that information once they're able to create robustness and a high degree of integrity around it. So I think at the moment, if you speak to nearly everybody, they would agree that sustainability data aggregation is in its infancy. But I think over the next 4 or 5 years, that's going to accelerate so that suddenly it does become an asset which a company can have in terms of the transparency and ownership it has on sustainability information within its own operations and within its supply chain will become increasingly important.
Okay, well, you've touched on the next point briefly, but if we can just maybe have a bit of a summary again. This huge push to standardize the ESG reporting methodology. What are your thoughts on that?
I can take an academic approach here. So on the one hand, yes, standardization is great. Suddenly folks are confused. So what is SASB and how's it different to GRI and what is TCFD? And my goodness, every week there's a new framework. And as a company, like what's important for me? And I've got this guy over here telling me one thing, I have that guy over there telling me another. Standardization and alignment, especially definitional alignment, I think is important. We don't need to define water a different way. Each person doesn't need to define water a different way. So to the extent that it's possible, having definitional alignment, I think is important. That being said, I think choice is important too. And I think giving customers or companies the ability to pick and choose those topics which are important to them is critical. And by important to them, I mean, not just important to them from a culture and values perspective, but also what are they able to report on? What do they feel comfortable reporting on? And giving them that flexibility to just start somewhere. I had someone telling me the other day, I don't want the Cadillac of reports on year one. I'm just not ready for it. I want to start with 5 things. And those 5 things are likely going to be things which I have a high degree of control over. So things like diversity information, that's relatively straightforward to capture. It tends to be quantitative and you can ask your head of HR. So it's generally an internal data aggregation process. But if you start going into some of the more complex questions, then we have to put a lot more thought and there's a lot more uncertainty around it. So I think choice, if I would have the best of both worlds, is standardization and alignment, but also giving choice. Because the standardization, the framework that you would put on top of a BP or a Shell, maybe not relevant or not appropriate at all for a company, a 20th of their size.
Okay, and this standardization, in your opinion, how will it affect the individual rating agencies? What I'm thinking about it is it might not be good for, the individual rating agencies. They want to, stand out as, we have our proprietary system. So how will this affect individual rating agencies?
It's a good question, and I'm not entirely sure. I mean, I think obviously you see a lot of deviation in the ratings between agencies, and the obvious example is Tesla. Either it scores an A because it reduces carbon emissions, or it scores an F because it uses child labor in the extraction of cobalt in Congo, or it scores a C because electric vehicle batteries are hard to recycle. Greater standardization. And you'll have leading ESG agencies giving completely different scores to the same company. So it's very confusing if you go out in the market. So if standardization improves that, then I think that's only a good thing. But at the moment, it's very difficult and it's very subjective. Again, you look at diversity. Does that mean of workforce or board level? And different people are defining that in different ways. And I think we're a whiles away from having a large degree of standardization. But obviously, we start somewhere, and the more progress we can make on the obvious things, and then let's move towards that.
Definitely. And I know you also had your hand in the oil and gas industry in your career, and also you currently still currently still work with quite a few of them. Some oil and gas operators might think that it's a lost cause, even trying to achieve a good ESG score. So what advice could you give them that will maybe have the biggest impact on improving their ESG score?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, I think this score is important, but our platform does not seek to give you a score. And I have this discussion a lot with my colleagues. I think sustainability reporting, it's more of a factual, this is what it is right now. This is where we are as a company. And in some cases, that's neither good or bad. It's just what it is right now. But what's important is what you're going to say you're going to be next year, and then measuring your progress against that. And so I think the scoring, in my belief, and I know there are lots of different opinions on this, but my belief is score is more about how you're progressing as a company rather than saying what you are at a specific time, because there's so many different variations between companies and what they're doing and the industries and the size and so on and so forth. And as I mentioned, Tesla, like how do you want to measure them? Because depending on what you care about, you're going to get a very different score. So I think, and what our platform does is we're not going to give you an A through F depending on what the information is. We are going to tell you what good looks like, and we are going to give you recommendations. But what's really important, I think, in our process is if you say, this year my number is X, and next year I want my number to be 2X, or I want my number to be half of X, and measure progress towards that goal and that target. That's what's most important. So I think companies, wherever they are in their evolution, in their journey, they can start setting targets on things. And these can be small targets, they can be large targets, they can be targets on 100 things or 2 things. So I think that's what's important. It's less about the score and more about the journey.
Okay, sure. Thank you, Mark. It's been a really, really nice interview. I have no doubt that your DiginexESG is going to be a great success, just accessible to everybody, and giving everybody a chance to jump in and actually really start to address this very important ESG reporting. Is there anything else that you would like to add?
If you go to diginex-solutions.com, you can see our platform, and please feel free to sign up for the 30-day trial. We put a lot of time and attention in onboarding clients. So we love feedback. We have a jam-packed feature development roadmap for the next 6 months, which we're really excited about. So many of the things which customers will come to us and say, oh, I wish you had this function, will typically be something say, well, that's funny, you should say that, but that's coming in 2 months' time. But we welcome all feedback, and I encourage folks to sign up for the 30-day trial and to give it a go.
Great. Sorry, just quickly hopping back to DiginexLUMEN and DiginexCLIMATE.
Yep.
Do you have an approximate date that you're looking to launch that, or don't you have any dates yet?
So DiginexLUMEN is already soft launched. We already have 3 customers. Our Our methodology is same with DiginexESG. We soft launched just a while ago with early customers. I think the official launch will probably be in July or August, but effectively it's up and running already. It's a great platform. I'm really excited about it. And I think DiginexCLIMATE will be around September.
Perfect. Well, I would love to have another interview with you again in the next couple of months. And I'm sure by that time you're going to say everybody has adopted it and we're doing great. Thanks again, Mark. It's been great chatting to you.